Hello there, this is Peter B. And it's a surprisingly another beautiful day in southern New England. They forecast for rain today, and it started out foggy and it burnt off, and it's another beautiful day. This is Friday, just before the Columbus Day weekend. And I'd like to show you my baseball photo collection. I'm rather new to it, and I just got a few, I mean. And unfortunately, I got into the game late, and baseball photo, type 1 photos by famous photographers are very, very expensive. They can be anywhere from 4 digits to 6 digits, depending on the player and the photographer and what the photo was used for. Very expensive, but I wanted to get some. Now, I actually took a little bit different route in my collection, knowing that Hall of Famers are going to be very expensive. I wanted a photo of the famous photographers of baseball, mainly the dead ball era and then up into the newer years of baseball. I mean, recent years of baseball. So, start things off. If you can read this, maybe I'll get a little closer. Just to explain the definitions. A first type 1 is a first generation photograph developed from the original negative during the period when the picture was taken, and that period is approximately 2 years. So when the photographer clicked his camera and developed a negative, anything printed from that point up to about 2 years later is a type 1. And those are the ones people want. Type 2 is a photograph developed from the original negative during a period of approximately 2 years after the picture was taken. So it's using the same negative that a type 1 uses, but the time is 2 years and greater after that original negative was taken. Type 3 is a second generation photograph developed from a duplicate negative or wire transmission during the period approximately 2 years from when the photo was taken. So if the photographer made a duplicate negative, or if it was a wire transmission, or used a photo to create a new photo, and it's all within 2 years of the original photo negative taken, that's a type 3. And finally, a type 4 is a second generation photograph, or third or later generation, developed from a duplicate negative or wired transmission during a later period of more than approximately 2 years after the picture was taken. So you could have a baseball picture taken in 1901, and someone could either find a negative or duplicate the negative, or make a copy from the original photo that negative took. 2 years after the picture was taken, it would be a type 4. So, get that out of the way. I don't need my stand anymore. So, my collection. First one I want to show you is Charles M. Conlon. He photographed from 1904 to the 30s. He was first and foremost a baseball photographer, which makes him different than the rest. A lot of the others were general photographers who became baseball photographers or did baseball photography on the side. Working out of New York City, he took photos at both NL parks, the Brooklyn Dodgers and New York Giants, as well as the AL park of New York, the New York Yankees and Highlanders. He took far more photos than anyone else in the dead ball era. And perhaps the most famous baseball photograph of Ty Cobb sliding into third base into Jimmy Austin, which is the thumbnail to this video, was done by Conlon. Many of his images went into the Spalding's Guide, the Reach Guide, Evening Telegram, Baseball Magazine, and of course on baseball cards. So here is a type 1 photo. I don't know if you can read that. Original photograph, type 1. PSA authenticated it. It's from 1909 of Red Kleinow. And I'm sitting here in bright sun, but it is actually a very, very sharp black and white photograph. Very nice example of a Conlon photo with that big old fashioned baseball mitt. He has the New York Yankees logo on his arm. The old baseball spikes and socks. So that's a Conlon, and on the back is his stamp. Once again, sorry, the reflection from the sun, but Charles M. Conlon, Evening Telegram, New York. So this one went to the Evening Telegram. Type 1, Charles Conlon. The next one is also a Charles Conlon. And this baseball player is Larry Komph, K-O-M-K-O-P-H. And this is from 1920. And that's a photograph of him batting. And this one was also printed for the Evening Telegram. That's probably Conlon's handwriting. Komph from Cincinnati. Probably giving him a one-time use. And you see where the Evening Telegram marked it up. At least I hope you can see it. You see there is a thin pencil line marked up on the photo where they wanted the cropping done for the image that was going to be used in the telegram. And they also drew a little outline around his hat so it doesn't get lost into the stands, make it stand out more for the paper. This is another type 1 photo, Conlon, from 1920, Larry Komph. And okay, the next famous photographer from the dead ball era is Carl J. Horner. And he photographed from 1903 to 1911. Now, Horner was a prominent baseball studio photographer. And people would come into his studio and get photographs done, and they'd be produced into these cabinet cards. Like any cabinet card of the day, very ornate. You see that Horner, 48 Winter Street, Boston, Mass. And the back. Typical of what photographers would use on the back of their cabinet cards. So he was a very fine studio photographer around the turn of the century. He was one of the first photographers to turn baseball photography into a profession, although he still was also a general photographer. Based in Boston, players from both town teams, that would be the American League Red Sox and National League Bees, Braves, whatever you want to call them, would visit his studio, both the players on the Boston teams as well as visiting players, to get their photographs taken in his studio. Horner wanted to provide a centralized source of every Major League ball player. So he wanted to catalog, have a photo of every Major League ball player. And so when visiting teams would come to Boston, he'd have them come into his studio and take photos, as well as the two Boston teams. And if anyone, any reason, wanted a particular player, he was the source. His photos appeared in Sporting Life and baseball cards such as the Brett Williams, Fan Craze, T205, and T206. And he is the photographer of the famous T206, Honus Wagner. So I showed you a generalized cabinet card of his with the very artistic bottom and back. And here is a small cabinet card. And this is Bob Wicker. And if you notice, I hope you can read it in the sun, his shirt says Cincinnati. That's a studio cabinet card of Bob Wicker. It's considered a Type 1. And it's pasted onto a cardboard backing. Keep it sturdy and alive from all these years. And this is the original. And Fan Craze wanted his photo for their 1906 cards. Oh, come on, come in better. So there's the Fan Craze card in the back. And if you notice, Bob Wicker, by the time this happened, is now with Chicago. So here's the original. And then the baseball card. Okay, next, another famous photographer from the dead ball era was Louis Van Oyen from Cleveland. And he was hired by the Cleveland Press in 1901 to be a photographer for the newspaper. Starting out as a press photographer, his passion for baseball established him as the newspaper's official baseball photographer. He later became the official American League baseball photographer, and in 1908 was the official World Series photographer until 1922. His style was to capture players in a more relaxed pose, as well as multiple players sitting or talking. His photos were used in the Lajoie Guide, a Cleveland Player, a Cleveland publication, Cleveland Photographer, as well as a few baseball cards. Photo I have of his is, I hope you guys can see it. The camera looks really dark because of the sun, but it's really a nice, bright, sharp photo. And this is from 1912, minor leaguer Walter Crum when he was trying out for the Cleveland Naps. And once again, I don't know if because it's so sunny out here, it's picking it up, but it is a very nice, clean photograph. And this is his stamp on the back, L. Van Oyen. And it is a Type 1 photo. Okay, then, besides these regular photographers working for themselves, this came in better focus. Let me try to, I think that's much better. And in case I missed it, here's the baseball card. Here's the cabinet and the Horner generalized cabinet. I just want to see the ornateness of it. Okay, There were also two famous photo agencies. First one is owned by George Graham Bain, and his agency was Bain's News Service. And the second one owned by Paul Thompson, and his was called the Article Syndicate. So many photographers would actually do the photos and then hand the negatives over to either agency. The agency would then sell them to magazines, guides, baseball cards, and both agencies had a huge inventory of well-done photos. So they kind of followed in the footsteps of Horner, who wanted to catalog everybody and be the centralized place to get that player. And then they would pay the actual photographer a commission. So here is an example of a Bain News Service photo. Once again, I hope you're seeing it. And this is George Burns of the Giants in 1921. And there's the name written into the negative. And another thing about the agencies, because they didn't do their own photos, they would get photos from all photographers in all places. So they just could get many more teams that way. And this is the back. And once again, I hope you can read it. It says photo by Bain's News Service, 255 Canal Street, New York. And the other one, the Paul Thompson, who owned the Article Syndicate. And this is a photo of Rabbit Moranville, taken around 1910. Let me just find my notes. Okay. Joseph Hall. He was actually a photographer from 1880s to 1910. His prints are very rare and hard to find. And they were used in many baseball publications, newspapers, as well as the Old Judge photos. Sorry about that. Man, I wish you could see the back on this one. That's the back. Once again, a generalized portrait. And that's the back. And it says he does outdoor photography. Joseph Hall, 111 Fulton Street in Brooklyn, New York. But he also did baseball photography. He did a lot of studio. Here is a print made from the original Old Judge negative, glass negative. Nothing on the back. But that is Flynn of Omaha. Okay, the next one, Francis P. Burke from Chicago, 1910 to 1918. He was actually a fantastic photographer with a very artistic eye. Rare to get prints from him. I don't have one. Many of his prints were made into Crackerjack cards, including the Ty Cobb, Walter Johnson, Shoeless Joe Jackson. on the back, he was a partner with a guy named Atwell. So the stamp on the back would say Burke and Atwell, but Burke was the main photographer getting all these photos. Next one is George Burke. Remember, Francis, 1910 to 1918. George Burke, also from Chicago, photographed from 1929 to 1951. And he was at the right place at the right time. In 1929, Cubs manager saw the beautiful photos of Francis P. Burke and wanted to hire him to be the Cubs' official photographer. Looking in the phone book, he saw Burke Studios, which wasn't far away from Wrigley Field. So he called Burke to come to Wrigley, and he wants to hire him to photograph. Well, that Burke ended up being George Burke. Burke took the assignment, but he knew little about the game of baseball. So he hired a young photographer and baseball enthusiast, George Brace. And together they became the permanent fixtures at Wrigley, Comiskey, and Soldiers Field as the official photographers of the Cubs, White Sox, and Chicago Bears. Burke was Babe Ruth's favorite photographer. Many of the Gowdy cards have Burke's images. In 1948, Burke had a stroke and he died in 1951. After he died, his partner, George Brace, inherited all of Burke's original negatives and photos, which he reprinted and sold them with a Burke and Bryce stamp on the back. And I'll show you the two differences between the Burke and the Burke-Bryce. In 1974, George Brace, remember the former apprentice of George Burke, met up with a guy named Bill McAllister, who agreed to colorize some of the old Burke photos. Together, they issued a card set called BRAMAC, B-R-A-M-A-C, for Brace McAllister. They had colorized the black and white photos and put labels on the photo that looked like the old-fashioned dynamo labels you'd make yourself to identify the players and date. So, let's look at some of the cards. This is a Elmer Vallow, early 40s. It's they cut around so when the newspaper could make a copy for their publication, it would have no distracting background. And there is the George Burke stamp. So Burke was alive when this one was issued. And here is a regular photo. Al Glossop from 1940 of the Boston Bees. And once again, Burke was alive. And that's the photo. Belmont Ave in Chicago. And he would have the typewritten name of the player on the back. Burke also made these tiny little stamp size photos in 1935. And this is Chick Haffey. And they were blank back. They'd be issued in strips, in a store like strip cards. You'd cut the photo out. And this was also done by Burke. And after Burke passed away, Brace would reprint his photos and sell them. And here's a photo of Luke Applin. And on the back, it would have the George Burke stamp, as well as the George Brace stamp. And he'd handwrite the player name. And he's been doing this for a while, and like I said, in 1974, he met McAllister, and they created these card sets. And they're colorized images of George Burke's photos, and they're labeled. This one is Bill Urbanski, and the photo was done in 1936 with the dynamo looking labels. Now, here is a J.D. McCarthy postcard. He was a famous photographer that would make these postcards. It's produced by J.D. McCarthy, and he was in Michigan. This one was actually mailed to Brookline, Massachusetts in 1958. And this is Ted Lepicio of the Boston Red Sox. And he did many players for a long time. And excuse me, I think my notes, oh, here they are. Yeah, he issued from the late 50s to the early 80s. So you can find postcards with the J.D. McCarthy stamp. Now, Douglas McWilliams. Living near Oakland as a kid, McWilliams would bring his Kodak camera to the Oakland Oaks games in the 50s and take photos. Other fans started to ask the boy if they could buy some of his photos. This led him to be very interested in photography, and he actually got a photography degree from Berkeley. When the A's relocated to Oakland in '68, he started to once again bring his camera to the game. In 1971, Vida Blue saw some of his prints, and he asked him to produce a bunch of postcards for him that he would use for signatures and to give out to fans. Other A's players started asking him for these same stacks of postcards. The postcard found its way to Topps, and they hired him as their Arizona spring training photographer. He shot photos for many Topps cards. He photographed the Herb Washington pinch runner card, or designated runner, and he also shot the Tony Gwynn rookie card, which Tony Gwynn actually stated he doesn't like because it makes his butt look fat. So after seeing Vida Blue's postcards, John Blue Moon Odom wanted to get into the act, so he asked Douglas McWilliams to make postcards for him. And you see that they would sign them and then give them to fans asking for signatures. And on the back is his postcard print. And he was in Berkeley, California, and he would actually print the player's name for the postcard. Okay, we're almost done. Clifton Boyle, famous photographer in the 70s and 80s. He produced many images, and he actually, like I said, he photographed into the 80s, early 80s, and he actually took a photo of a rookie named Ken Griffey Jr., whose Type 1 photos sold for high four digits. Anyways, here's his photo of Vita Blue. And they were very clear, nice blurred background, but you still see what's going on. The mound is tack sharp, and Blue himself is tack sharp. I like this photo. I like the angle he took. And that's his stamp. And we're going to end it with a Chicago Tribune staff photographer photo. This photographer was asked to go to Wrigley Field because the Cubs just called up a rookie first baseman on July 6, 1951. And his assignment was to get a photo of the new rookie for the paper. And here is that rookie. And that rookie's name is Chuck Connors. Chuck Connors of the Rifleman fame. But this is when he played for the Cubs, first brought up to the major leagues. And on the back, I'm assuming the photographer was Chester Welton, but not sure. It was taken at Cubs Park, July 6, 1951. And I don't have the full photo from the paper, but I do got the caption. I don't know if you can read it. It says, Kevin Chuck Connors, Cubs' new 6 foot 5.5 inch first baseman, will be on the job when the North Siders play a doubleheader with Cincinnati in Wrigley Field today. Connors, from Los Angeles, was leading the Pacific Coast League and runs batted in when recalled. So I think this is a very neat photo for my collection, the Rifleman, and that ends my showing of my photos. I thank you very much.